Good morning. We're here at Arkenstone Vineyards in Angwin for the 2018 Napa Valley Harvest Press Conference. With me, I'm Jennifer Putnam, Executive Director and CEO for the Napa Valley Grapegrowers, and with me is Pete Richmond, to my left, the partner at Silverado Farming Company. Kelly McLeod is Director of Vineyard Operations at Hudson Vineyards, and Sam Kaplan is Director of Winemaking and the General Manager here at Arkenstone. We will be taking questions through the live stream, so we welcome any questions. We'll take those at the end. And we'll start off, I think, with an overview of the growing season for 2018 and taking us all the way back from bud break. Can we have a conversation about, maybe we'll start, Sam, here. What was it like up here on the mountain for you through the beginning of the season?
Sure, yeah. So it was very, very typical, early April bud break. We didn't have any frost issues here at the beginning of the year. We were tracking about 10 days, 2 weeks behind last growing season, but really the weather was fantastic. Things got off to a nice start. Great sunny beginning and normal bud break, I'd say.
Normal timing?
Yeah. I mean, compared to last year, it was about 10 days behind,
yeah,
very early April.
Going all the way to the other side of the valley in Carneros, what was bud break?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to back up even more than that, we had these really nice kind of easy rains in December and January, and I think that helps alleviate some concerns post-fire, because the hillsides, I was able to help with germination of our cover crops and our hillsides. And so I think that and then the big rainstorms for us in Carneros came in March and April. And so we started the growing season with kind of full soils. And then, yeah, I mean, I think it did seem 7 to 10 days later than last year, but much closer to normal, much closer to kind of a typical year. And we had really even temperatures, an even growing season, really elongated bloom, great set, just kind of super smooth. I would say that we had more fog in Carneros, which is very typical in August, but the last couple years we haven't really had as much. So yeah, very smooth, easy growing season.
And so do you still have fruit out in Carneros?
We do.
Yeah. And what about you up here?
So we just finished picking up here on Howell Mountain last Friday. So
okay.
we just finished a couple days ago.
How much would you say, what percentage is left out there for you?
Very little. We have, I would say we're 95% finished.
Mm-hmm.
I'm envious. We have about 400 tons left to go.
Okay. Cabernet?
Cabernet primarily, and it's spread throughout the valley. If you ask me, I always look at vintages, and this is terrible, but I remember vintages by how difficult they were. So I blot out the rest of them. This will be a vintage that I don't remember because it's been seamless, and that's not because of us, it's just because of the forces of nature, and so it's really gone smoothly, and it really hasn't challenged us as growers. I don't know what you guys think, but it really has gone about as picture perfect as we could have hoped for in the process. But I think that, I don't know what you guys think, but that's what I see. It's just sort of close to, or knock on wood, but close to perfection.
I agree, and I think that just as the growing season was that for the vineyard managers, the harvest is kind of shaping up to be that for the winemakers. I think so often at harvest we're faced with these kind of weather challenges with heat and with rain, and this year it really was a winemaker's dream. I mean, they got to kind of consciously choose exactly what they wanted, which is one of the best ways to start in the cellar, I think, is to be able to make all of these decisions and bring in the fruit that you really want.
And it seemed like they're able to bring it in when they want, right? Because there isn't this line at the crush pad or these rushes. There hasn't seemed to have been a lot of rushes.
Well, we didn't get that. Typically, I always look at, if you get through September 15th, it's sort of easy going if you don't get those heat spikes. And we never got that heat this year, in that Labor Day weekend heat, which we had last year. And so once you get through that heat, it's like, oh, okay, we're going to get through this, and if we can get through that, it's going to sail along. And it's really, I mean, I'm dating myself, but it reminds me a lot of the 97 vintage. Large crop, really good quality. And so, again, knock on wood, we're probably 2 weeks left of picking. to go of Cabernet and a few of the other Bordeaux varietals, but the weather looks good, and I think it's going to come in beautifully.
When you say larger crop, talk
So yeah, larger crop. You know, it's always, oh, it's above average, and what's average? Well, Cabernet in the Valley is usually 3¼ tons the acre. So I would say if you looked at us across the board, we're probably closer to 4 tons the acre in total on everything. And it seems to be some pieces we picked, we've been spot on our crop estimates. And I always say crop estimates are one of the black arts. I don't know how to do them. I'm not very good at them, and I'm generally best the day after we pick. So from the standpoint of like, yeah, it's big, but it's not huge. So but again, the fruit is just in fantastic shape. You don't see any raising, you don't see any dimpling. It's phenomenal.
Is that, what are the winemakers saying, Sam?
Yeah, I think it is kind of a great winemaker's vintage in that we get to cherry pick at optimal ripeness. I mean, everything's been nice and spread out. I mean, starting with Sauvignon Blancs up here on Howell Mountain, the end of August. So it was just really well spaced out. We didn't have any heat spikes that sort of force you to pick, you know, because sugar started rising too fast. So it has, other than more fruit in some cases than expecting. The quality is fantastic, great colors so far in the fermenters. All the color extraction is just tremendous, and quality seems fantastic. So it's been spread out and it's been great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Does it feel like any vintages that the two of you have gone through? Are there parallels?
I can't date myself back to '97.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Quite, you know.
And in terms of, we're at just past the 1-year anniversary of the fires, and I think there's a lot of interest from people who don't live here and even our community within Napa about how that's affected the vineyards and the landscape and the wildlife. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about fire recovery and kind of what the situation was for you then and what you had to do to recover. I know your section of Carneros burned extensively.
It did, but we've kind of seen remarkable recovery. We, after the fire, we flagged and mapped all of the sections of the vineyard that we had some concern about that had damage. And we found that the areas that had just foliage that had burned had no long-term damage. And the areas, in general, on the 200 acres of vines, we lost probably less than 100 vines total. Mm. So in general, the recovery has been pretty incredible.
I would say the same thing. We've lost a few vineyards, or we had fire burn through a few vineyards. And other than destruction of drip hose and wooden stakes, it's really surprising how well the vines have come back. And I think we were a little stunned that they came back so quickly. And it's also sort of stunning, and Kelly probably can talk about this, but the restorative powers of the areas outside the vineyard and how the oaks are, yeah, some of them are burned, but they're coming back. It's just really stunning to see how all that's happening.
It is remarkable when you think that some entire hillside was black and it could never come back, and now it's 80% green.
Yeah, and the wildflowers this spring were fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is incredible.
And so do you think that there's any long-term, you're not seeing any production drop or any increased virus or anything like this from stress?
The reality is we're just really starting to look at virus right now because we're late enough in the season, but we don't think so. But I think this is something we're going to have to measure over a couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like I said, we mapped and kind of marked these sections in case we needed to manage them differently and prune them differently.
So you didn't pull them out?
We didn't pull them out. The handful, the less than 100 vines we did pull out that were dead. But we kind of did some scrapings and checked for vascular flow and to make sure that the vine seemed healthy in order to be able to sustain the canopy and the fruit load. And so far, everything, people say that sometimes you can have a crash in the second year, but so far everything seems to really be holding up.
Mm-hmm. What was the experience?
Yeah, we didn't, luckily we were out of the burn area up here on Howell Mountain, so we didn't have to deal with any of that, but some other vineyards we work with, yeah, it's amazing. They've just rebounded, and it's nice to see the green hillsides coming back, so.
Yeah. So when you have a season like this, is your workforce? I would imagine that the steady work is much more manageable in terms of moving your crews around and whatnot. What's kind of your feeling as a vineyard manager, the status of the workforce this year?
I think, we're fortunate here to be able to pay probably the highest price in the country for hourly agriculture work. So that's certainly an attractive. And people say, oh, there's a labor shortage. And my argument is, well, there's a wage shortage. If we pay more, we'll get people.
Yeah.
So you can look at it that way. But, Napa is, in itself, it's not like it was 30 years ago. Because we're doing so much work all year long in the vineyard, our workforce isn't migratory. They're here all year long. And so they're with us all year long. And so we're able to keep people working the entire season. And because of pressure from everything, we're continually raising wages every year, not just us, but at the Valley as a whole is continuing to push wages every year. So I didn't feel like as a whole we had a workforce issue this year. It was just we were able to get, again, that's partly because of the pay rates and partly because of the timing of work this year was relatively seamless.
And so it was a labor heavy year? You needed more? You needed labor neutral?
I would say labor neutral. Typically for us, everybody says harvest is the big time. It's really April, May, June is when we're really pushing. And so because we didn't get a lot of spring rains, we didn't have to go back in and resucker vineyards twice, which we would normally do. So it was pretty even workflow for us all year long. I don't know what you guys saw, but that was what we felt like.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I mean, it didn't seem, in comparison to last year where we had so much rain, that we had so much vigor, it really was kind of a lighter labor year. Not certainly, no year is incredibly light in labor, but yeah.
And what do you think is, there's always talk about mechanization, and there are some strong opinions about whether or not that works in the Napa Valley. What are your opinions about the future of mechanization in this workforce discussion, right? Because it needs to play some role. What are your opinions, strong or otherwise, about mechanization?
I think you have a little more experience in that than I do.
I would say that for us, the labor force, our crew will always be the kind of heart and soul and backbone of Napa and of our company. But that as we face these labor shortages, I think that we have to adapt, and I think that we have to kind of embrace some mechanization in order to stretch the resources that we do have. And so we have started to kind of embrace some mechanical pruning as well as some mechanical assisted leafing, and that's been great for our operation. It allows us to continue to have full-time year-round employees, but kind of stretch those really busy times of the year in order to kind of execute our farming and do it on a timely basis.
Yeah, in my career lifetime in the Valley, I don't think we're ever going to be completely mechanized, because exactly what Kelly's talking about, we got to have that hand touch to the vineyards to fine tune everything. We're going to continue to adapt where we can, but it's still primarily going to be hand labor that does most of this work.
So leafing is an interesting process to mechanize. What other innovations have worked for you or get you excited about kind of the future of that mechanization technology?
We've done some mechanical planting this year versus planting versus hand crews, which is GPS driven. We're still evaluating it to see if we have some cost savings on that, and if it does, not just cost savings, but is the quality of the work the same as what a hand crew would do? And it's what jobs can we take away from the hand crews that we can use their talents other places. So sort of those redundant jobs that are extremely strenuous, can we have a machine do those versus having hand crews do? So it's also evaluating our workforce and saying, what can we have the workforce focused on?
Yeah. How about redevelopment in the vineyard? How about investments? How old are the vineyards here?
So vineyards were planted in 1998 and 99, so they're still they're getting up there, but they're doing great, very consistent crop, and so we haven't been doing too much redevelopment. So.
And you have a year-round workforce here?
Yeah, so we at Arkansas we have a small crew. We have 4 to 5 people year-round. So we farm everything in-house, and it's all hand farmed. So we don't have much mechanization beyond tractors and hedgers, but we're able to get through it. And I think that's, case in point to this vintage was it was just smooth and even, and there was no weather pushing any picks or anything. So we were able to just pick slowly and when we want and use our crew. So it was great. Can't complain.
Are any of you running any research trials in vineyards, or looking at trials for mechanization or trials for quality or
We've got a
rootstock?
few trials that we're looking at. Machine leafing versus hand leafing that we then are turning into wine to evaluate wine quality from the two. Some early pruning versus very late pruning to look and see if hang time makes some differences, and then evaluating them from a wine quality point of view. And then, as somebody says, you're always fighting your last battle, and if you remember 2017, how hot it was, we've put out multiple misting trials to try for cooling of fruit. Of course, we didn't use them this year because it wasn't hot, so check in with me next year and I'll tell you what we think of those.
Yeah, we're always experimenting. I mean, we kind of track different rootstocks within the same block. We've started, we have a small section of Grenache that we're now shade clothing. We kind of always have small trials going on.
Yeah. And what about reinvestment in your area in terms of replanting?
We are replanting a couple of blocks, but I would say that's more of just the natural cycle of vines. Most of those blocks were planted in the 90s and have just kind of slowed in production to a point that they're no longer economical. And so we are replanting them, and as we look towards the future with replanting, we are kind of considering that in the life of that vineyard it might need to have a little bit more mechanical touch, and so we're kind of trying to think ahead and plant these vineyards knowing that that might be the case.
For row spacing and trellising and...
Exactly, a little bit robust trellising, and just to prepare in case that's the case, in case that happens.
What do you see with clients and other vineyard management trends?
I think, if you look at
investment?
most of the vineyards, I shouldn't say most, but a good portion of the vineyards in the valley were planted in the early 90s. And so now those vineyards are 25 years old, so you're starting to see that life cycle of those vineyards come out. So we did a considerable amount of replanting this year, and nothing terribly radical. In the 90s we were on 8-foot row spacings, now we're going down to 6.5-foot row spacings on most stuff. But really looking at double poly or double irrigation sets so we can irrigate vineyards individually, looking at misting, changing row direction. So it's not radical changes, it's just continually to fine-tune things.
I was in the I block the other day, the Sauvignon Blanc, right, 45, and it's really interesting to think about not taking everything out, right? To leave some so that we can have almost just another experiment and another expression of these wines.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing more of that where we're getting much better at just roguing vines out and replanting, so that vineyards that may be 25 years old, we've decided to keep going, so we're maybe 10% of that vineyard's out of production while we replant it internally, and we can keep those old vines alive and keep them going.
Yeah, because that's interesting too. So what are some other trends that the three of you follow in the valley when you're, I'm sure you're on the road from time to time and people are asking you questions? What is interesting going on either in this vintage or just in general, trends that you follow in the valley?
I think in general, one of the challenges we all have is making sure we keep our workforce sustainable. I mean, we're a logistics company essentially, so we're just about employing people and making sure that we try to treat them right and keep them around. So what are those other things we're doing as an organization and as a valley to make sure our workforce continues to want to come to work here with the challenges of the cost of housing, the transportation, and all the other things? We don't have any answers, but we're trying.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just that continual dialogue of trying to figure out how we keep everything going.
Yeah. Is it time for questions? All right, Sam, I think this one's going to you.
Okay, how is the 2018 fruit tasting?
Should we see?
Well, not quite bottom, but welcome to taste. So far, everything is really fantastic. The whites are coming around in barrel. They're all pretty much bone dry at this point and very expressive. And the Cabernets that are fermenting have great color, great tannin, great fruit extraction. So we're really optimistic. It's nice to have a little bit more too than past vintages. So
Berry size, cluster size. What gave you the?
just cluster size, really. I would say. I mean, you know, we thin up here to standards, you know, that are very consistent every year to get everything ripe and perfect. And so here we weren't that much heavier, so it's just slightly larger clusters, but still had nice, loose, open bunches, and it was great. Can't complain.
What about, I feel like across the valley I've been hearing about really bright acidity in reds, and we've seen that in Carneros. Are you guys
Yeah, definitely.
really beautiful pHs? And
Yeah,
nice
the pHs
acidity?
have been, I would say, a bit lower than say the last couple of years. So the acids, therefore, are just really bright. So it's great. I think this is going to be, I think it's going to be one of those vintages that's going to be stunning in several years. It's going to come around and.
Sam, do you think we're picking it because it's a little bit later year? Are we picking as high sugars as we have been in the past couple of years?
No. I think that's part of this gradual, nice growing seasons. We didn't have those heat spikes that brought the sugars way up. So for me, the sugars have been say lower than the last couple of years with bright acid. So I mean that's kind of in my wheelhouse. I love that. I mean, we can have, you know, really expressive fruit, great, rich, ripe wines, but not over the top. So they're bright. They're fun. So. All right.
Well, that seems like the perfect moment to toast the vintage 2018 and all of you for sharing what you know with everyone on the live stream. Cheers.
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 All right. Cheers.